In the Imperial Russian service since 1891, the Free-Line Rifle 1891, or Mosin Nagant, was the staple firearm of the USSR throughout the Revolution, Civil War and early Stalin era. During their career, the Mosin Nagant was never regarded as the greatest bolt-action rifle. However, it was reliable and easy to produce. Designed by Sergei Mosin and Leon Nagant, the Mosin Nagant was a bolt-action rifle with an internal magazine that carried 5 rounds. The rifle's caliber was 7.62mm and fired a rimmed cartridge. The magazine was single stack and the weapon used a socket bayonet. Throughout the weapon's lifetime, modifications and updates were implemented onto the gun. This culminated in 1930 with the Free-Line Rifle Model 1891-30. The new rifle was marginally shorter than the early models and also had a protected front sight hood. With the advent of self-loading technology, the clunky bolt action of the Mosin was deemed to be inadequate, and therefore the Red Army began to look for a new self-loading rifle. Semi-automatic rifles have been in Imperial Russian Army service since 1917. The Fedorov model of 1917 was produced in small numbers until 1927. The Fedorov used the short recoil system in which the barrel recoiled to cycle the gun. Complex and expensive, the weapon was replaced in 1935 by the automatic rifle Simonov model of 1936. The AVS-36 was a short gas piston operated rifle with a 15-round magazine and a fire selector for both automatic and semi-automatic fire. The rifle was mass-produced until 1939, though it was officially replaced in 1938. The AVS-36 was not a perfect rifle. Heavy, complex to make, and inaccurate through sustained fire, an alternative rifle was adopted in 1938. The semi-automatic rifle Tokarev, model of 1938, was introduced in 1938 and was manufactured until 1940. The rifle held 10 rounds and lacked a fire selector. Still using a short piston for recoil, the rifle was a marked improvement over the AVS-36. During the Winter War with Finland, the SVT-38 was found to be still too heavy for troops, and the weapon was complex to make. Therefore, a new simplified rifle was designed and implemented from 1940. The SVT-40 was the ultimate wartime semi-automatic rifle fielded in numbers by the Red Army. Being an improvement over the SVT-38, the SVT-40 replaced the wooden foregrip with a stamped metal one, along with other minor improvements. This example here is a deactivated late 1941 example. If we look above the breech and behind the rear sight, we can see the stampings of this rifle. The rifle is dated from 1941 and has the stamping from the Ishevsk factory. The rifle was restored post-war in the USSR as indicated by the square stamping and the cherry red oxidizer on the bolt carrier. To properly date the rifle, we must look more closely at the technical features of the rifle. Firstly, this rifle has a muzzle brake with 6 ventilation ports per side. From September 1941, a 2 ventilation port muzzle brake would be fielded. The earlier muzzle brake would still be issued until mid-1942, but in ever-dwindling numbers. Secondly, this rifle has a stamped metal foregrip with 7 ventilation holes per side. This was introduced in September 1941 and replaced an 8 cut-out foregrip. This indicates that the rifle was manufactured in the last quarter of 1941. Lastly, the stock of the rifle is thin, with a single circular insert for strengthening. SVT-40 stocks were often found to be very weak, and therefore was thickened and strengthened from September 1941, though thin stocks would be used until 1942. Now let's briefly look into the uniform-specific items for the SVT-40. I am dressed in the uniform of a sergeant of the 34th Motorised Infantry Regiment 34th Tank Division 8 Mechanised Corps in June 1941. I do not have any extra items of uniform, just a belt and ammunition pouches. Each man should have 2 pouches. These ones are made from pigskin, but leather was more common. One holds a stripper clip of 7.62mm ammunition, and the other holds 2 10-round preloaded magazines. It should be stressed that all manner of pouches and combinations were seen in the field, and two matching pouches were not necessarily the norm. We have 4 pictures here to analyse, and if you are thinking of reenactments, it is recommended that you explore period photographs. Firstly, we have a Starsha with an AVS-36. On his left side is an AVS-36 magazine pouch, and on his right, a split-type pouch for ammunition on stripper clips. AVS-36 pouches were very similar to SVT-40 pouches, but were longer as to accommodate the larger magazines. Second is a mountain soldier who has an SVT-40. Notice that this soldier has 2 split-type pouches for stripper clip ammunition stowage. The SVT and AVS series of rifles could all be loaded from clips directly into the rifle. Also notice the bayonet and frog. Thirdly, in this photograph we can see 3 soldiers with vastly different loadouts. The man on the left has a split-type ammunition pouch and a reserve ammunition pouch. The reserve pouch was common even before the war, and generally carried unpacked or loose cartridges. As the war progressed, they were increasingly used as primary pouches. The man in the centre only has 1 split-type ammunition pouch. Interestingly, he's wearing it on the left side, which for a single pouch was less common than on the right. Finally, the soldier on the right has a single split-type pouch on his right. The last photograph we can see a soldier with a single SVT-40 magazine pouch on his right side, his left having an RDG-2 anti-tank grenade attached to it. These photographs, mostly from late 1941 and early 1942, show the diversity of pouches and combinations that a semi-automatic rifleman might have access to. If you are in a country that limits access to semi-automatic firearms and you have a deactivated rifle, like my example, there are still a couple of things you can do to the rifle for demonstration purposes. One thing you can do is remove the cleaning rod and simulate cleaning. Alternatively, you can remove the foregrip to reveal the workings of the rifle. Despite being deactivated, we can strip a surprising amount of the rifle. For a full takedown, you must first remove the forward barrel band. Then you can gently lift and remove the foregrip panels. This fully reveals the gas piston and cup assembly, along with the rear sight assembly. Pulling back on the rod reveals the degree of motion of the gas piston. Pulling back on the piston only will remove it from the gas cup. To remove the rear assembly, first you must push the dust cover forward. This will be under spring tension. Use your thumb to hold the spring forward and disconnect the dust cover. Gently return the spring. To remove the recoil spring, simply move it to the side. Take care not to shoot the spring across the room. As can be seen, this is as far as you can strip an EU regulation SVT-40. The bolt is welded in place, as is the fire control group. That's one stripped rifle that you and the public will love. Now we have looked over a real rifle, accessories and takedown, we must now look at other variations before wrapping up with wartime service. Firstly, perhaps the most well-known implementation of the SVT-40, that of a marksman rifle. All 1940 and 1941 rifles were produced with a milled rail for the attachment of a 2.5x zoom scope, though only designated marksman rifles were also milled to accommodate the latch for the scope and the dust cover. 51,000 SVT-40s were produced in the marksman variant, however the rifle was not a success in this role. Due to the vertical shot dispersion of the rifle, consistency on each shot was not guaranteed, and therefore production of marksman rifles ended in May 1942, with subsequent rifles lacking milled rails for a scope. Secondly, from May 1942, AVT-40 rifles were issued to troops. The AVT-40, or Automatic Rifle Tokarev 1940, was outwardly almost identical to the SVT-40, however a fire selector was placed behind the trigger. This selector had a cutout in the stock that mirrored the SVT-40 safety. It was hoped that the AVT-40 would make up for losses of light machine guns, but the fire rate was too fast and the stocks too weak, and malfunctions and breakages were common. AVT-40 production was halted by the summer of 1943, though stocks with cutouts would be used until stocks ran out. Lastly and briefly, a carbine version of the SVT-40 was produced in limited numbers. The SKT-40 was intended for Soviet airborne troops, and as many as 3,000 were manufactured. Not much is known about the rifle, and only a handful of pictures exist. As for the rifle's performance in general during the war, it was a mixed bag to say the least, and troop preferences reflected the production numbers of SVT-40s. In 1940, 225,763 SVT-40s were produced. Then, in 1941, 1.1 million rifles were produced. Upon the German invasion on June 22, 1941, there was an estimated 400,000 SVT-40s, and about the same again in SVT-38 and AVS-36 rifles. This meant that roughly 1/3 of the soldiers had access to semi-automatic weapons. The rifles, however, were not universally liked by the troops. The rifles had reliability issues during sustained fire. Often, the gas bleed valve needed adjusting after just 100 rounds were fired. To a well-trained soldier, this was an issue that could be overlooked, but in the desperate days of 1941, there was no time for adequate training. Additionally, the rifles were more delicate than the Nagant, and during production, efforts were made to strengthen the stocks of the rifles. The SVT-40 quickly fell out of favour with troops and commanders alike. Many soldiers preferred the new PPSH-41 submachine gun, which proved itself in the fighting in Stalingrad. The long and heavy rifle was not suited to the kind of fighting seen in the cities and only came into its own at medium combat ranges. The SVT-40 was also more complex to manufacture than though the PPSH and the Mosin rifle, which had been reintroduced into production after the German invasion. The fall from grace reflected in production figures. After 1.1 million rifles were produced in 1941, only 115,396 SVT and 167,863 AVT rifles were produced in 1942. In 1943, only 213,886 rifles were manufactured, and 1944 the figure was only 118,753. Finally, in 1945, production ended with 999 rifles being produced. Strangely, German and Finnish troops loved the rifle, Germany going as far as to copy the gas system in their Gewehr G43 semi-automatic rifle. The only branch of the military that really liked the SVT-40 was the Red Navy. This was perhaps because the naval infantry had more opportunities to train with the rifle, becoming accustomed to the maintenance of the weapon. However, the SVT-40 was almost a rarity in the second half of the war, being replaced mostly by Mosin carbines, PPSHs and PPS-43s. Despite the poor wartime performance, the SVT-40 is reasonably well regarded today, with most people accepting the failings and pinning them mostly down to inadequate training. Even as the war came to a close with the victory over Nazi Germany in May and Imperial Japan in September 1945, the Red Army would soon adopt the SVT-40's replacement, the SKS-45, itself replaced just 2 years later by the AK-47. The time of the semi-automatic rifle came and went in a blink, but the SVT-40 would come through as the second highest mass-produced semi-automatic rifle after the M1 Garand in the USA. Well, thank you if you've made it all the way to the end of this video. This video took almost 3 months to make, mostly just through sheer laziness, but I had to learn a lot while making this video. Not only history of the rifle, but how to edit. It took so long, in fact, that a couple of items came that I wanted to originally be in the video, but didn't make it. This is an SVT-38 bayonet, incredibly rare, and that's an SVT-40 bayonet, and unfortunately the monkey that decided to, because these are both battlefield finds, the monkey that decided to repair this one, put the muzzle nut ring on upside down, so I couldn't even attach it to the rifle to show you how it looks. But I do have a couple of thank yous as well, massive thank yous. First and foremost to my wonderful friend and housemate Murron Daley. She was my camera woman, she was my editor, tutor. She's just been a really patient and fantastic person. I can't thank her enough. All my gratitude and love towards you. I would like to thank the cat in front of me for being so floofy. I want to thank you guys for watching it all the way to the end. That was a real labour of love. It took a long time. I'm not the best editor, I'm not the best cinematographer, I'm not that charismatic in front of the camera, but you know, it's all about the enjoyment you get at the end of it, I suppose. So if you enjoyed it, please like the video. If you really like the video, maybe even consider subscribing. I'm moving more towards history content over video games, although I do a bit of both. And to end the video, I think we should appreciate the cat on my desk.